This week, I am so excited to bring you on a tour of the National Shrine of St. Rita of Cascia. She is a remarkable saint, and this is a church unlike anything you've probably ever seen before. I'm so excited to bring you with, so let's go.
In terms of the history of the shrine, the cornerstone was laid in 1907, and the shrine construction was finished by 1915. And actually the whole shrine was built by Italian and Irish immigrants with a devotion to St. Rita. This parish is run by Augustinians, and it always has been run by Augustinians. So the Archdiocese actually requested that the Augustinians build a parish out here because Philadelphia, though it's really packed in modern times, it was a bit more spaced out, and this area wasn't as built up as it used to be. So there was a flock out here that needed a shepherd, and so they asked the Augustinians to establish the St. Rita parish here. The pink and red color on the wall that actually correlates to the miracle of the rose. This shrine is such a hidden gem of South Broad Street in Philadelphia. People come in and they're just amazed. And the history behind it is so intentional, and design very intentional as well. The immigrants laid each tile on the floor by hand. They cut them by hand, they laid them by hand. That's why you can see they're just a little crooked. And each tile is actually 2 inches deep. Something else that they did by hand was they also painted the frescoes that you see, the dome and the ceiling. And in the dome we see St. Rita in the center, and she's surrounded by various saints. And then St. Rita is rising up to God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit to heaven. They painted this all by hand, but they actually didn't sign it because what was most important to them was the devotion to St. Rita and the devotion to God, as opposed to taking credit for any of their work. Rita was born in 1381 to parents Antonio and Amata Lodi, and they worked as peacemakers, an elected position at that time, like mayors, city council members. They had skills in negotiating peace between different groups in Italy. So when different families and stuff were feuding, which was very common back in that time, they would call in Antonio and Amata Lodi to negotiate a peace agreement between those groups and between those families. Rita was born in 1381 to them, and they named her Margarita, meaning precious pearl. The color, you can see the pearl marble color, and that reflects her name of precious pearl. She saw her parents, she witnessed them working as peacemakers, and that really inspired her. And another influential group of people were the Augustinian nuns that were close by. She would go visit these sisters very frequently. They knew her well, they enjoyed her company, and she was very deeply impressed by their witness to their faith. When she was a young teenager, she went up to her parents and she said, Mom, Dad, I think I'm called to be a sister. And they said, that might not be a good idea. It wasn't that they didn't want that for her, it was the environment of the time. They were peacemakers, so they had insight into how the vendettas and the different revenge schemes between groups of people affected life in the convent. And so they arranged her marriage at the time, which was very common back then, to a man named Paolo Mancini. He was a man of good reputation, and so Rita and Paolo were betrothed at the age of 14, and they lived together as husband and wife when she was 16. And so she was married to Paolo. Paolo worked as the town watchman. So he stood on the edge of town in a tower, watched people come in and out. And this job was very stressful because it required a lot of confrontation. If someone came and he knew that they were going to try to do something bad in the town, or would have to confront them and turn them away. So the job was very stressful, but together they had 2 teenage boys. Everything was relatively smooth and peaceful in their home. But one day, Paolo didn't come home from his work, and when they got to the watchtower, they actually found that Paolo had been murdered. Paolo's family, the Mancini family, actually had generations of rivalry with another family in town. And it wasn't anything Paolo did, and years of ill will and bad intentions. And so he had been murdered by a member of the rival family, and this devastated Rita, obviously. Like, she loved Paolo, and they had a beautiful marriage, but even more than that, Rita was so preoccupied. What am I going to tell my sons, my young teenage sons, who are so susceptible to this environment of vendetta and vengeance? And so she prayed, and finally she told her sons, and their reaction was exactly what she feared, because they said, oh, well, now we're gonna go get revenge. She prayed and prayed, and she asked God, God, if there's any other way that my sons cannot pursue this path, because she knew it could end in violence, it could end in death, and she didn't want that mark on her son's soul. And there actually another way ended up occurring, and it's not something that she saw coming, but an illness swept through and took the lives of her 2 young sons. So as her sons were passing away, she prayed with them. She showed them the image of Christ to feel a sense of peace before they passed. So in that way, her prayers were answered, although it wasn't in a way she anticipated. She takes us through the first half or so of St. Rita's life, but the beauty of St. Rita, she had a variety of vocations. So at this point, she's been daughter, she's been mother, she's been wife, and now she is widow, and with her sons also passing away. So at this point, she is just enveloped in prayer once again, asking God, okay, what now? And that's when she actually reached out to her patron saints. So the beautiful thing about the shrine is that the architecture speaks so much to St. Rita's story. The windows actually tell the second half of her life. This window, we see Rita in the front with the green and blue with her 3 patron saints. So the first patron saint with the pointy hat and the red robe, that's St. Augustine. She had a devotion to him because of the Augustinian nuns in her area. In addition to St. John the Baptist, who's kind of tucked in the back with a beard, but he was also a great inspiration for her as well. There was a church nearby named after him. And the third saint, not a lot of people can identify. He's not as well known, but in Rita's time, he was actually pretty famous. He was canonized during her lifetime. So she, as well as a lot of townspeople, had a great devotion to St. Nicholas of Tolentine with the heart on his robe. And so there she is with her 3 patron saints, discerning God's next plan for her. And she's approaching the door of the convent, prayerfully wondering if this is what God has willed for her. This is one of my favorite windows. So this image shows St. Rita approaching Mother Superior. And you can see that her patron saints are helping her to tune into God's wisdom. Her saints are in that purple cloud that's inspiring her with God's wisdom as she approaches Mother Superior. Now, Mother Superior knew Rita because Rita had visited a countless number of times. And so Rita says, I feel this very strong call to become a sister. Can I please enter the convent? And Mother Superior said, it's not a good idea. Specifically in this situation, Mother Superior was a little nervous because Rita married into the Mancini family, the family that were the rivals of the Mancinis, sister in the convent, who belonged to that rival family. And so they weren't worried about that sister in the convent and St. Rita, they were worried about the reactions of the families outside the convent. Rita still, though, she was very convicted in her call, and she also remembered her childhood, not only the childhood call to be a nun, but also to be a peacemaker. She, through the intercession of the saints, approached the Mancini family and the rival family, and she explained her situation to them, which it felt like the millionth time that she had told them how much she was hurt by the rivalry, how much she hurt when her sons died, when her husband was killed because of the rivalry. In this particular instance, the family members who at first might have ignored her, they said, you know what, that's enough. We've had enough of this rivalry. So she actually brokered a peace agreement between the Mancinis and their rival family, which ended a generations-long feud. It's one of the many reasons she's known as the Saint of the Impossible and also patron of peacemakers. And so that red book in the middle is the peace agreement. He's presenting it to Mother Superior, and Mother Superior was so impressed and so moved by this act of peace, she was no longer worried about Rita entering. So Rita entered the convent at the age of 36. In terms of her life as a nun, it was pretty normal, pretty routine. There's not a whole lot recorded because she just was a good member of community, very prayerful. So this window fast forwards to the end of her life. St. Rita was bedridden, and one of her cousins came to visit. And in being in the presence of Rita and reminiscing, the cousin was so moved. She said, you know what, Rita, anything you want, I'll get it for you. What do you want? And Rita said, I want to go to heaven. And the cousin was like, okay, I can't do that. But name like an object, I can get you an object. And St. Rita said, oh, well, I would like you to go back to my family home in Rocca Perenna, and I would like for you to fetch a fresh rose from my home in my garden. And the cousin was a little hesitant about this because not only is Rocca Perenna in the mountains, but it also is January. So it was covered in snow. So she's like, I really don't think I'm gonna be able to find that rose, but out of love for Rita, devotion to Rita, she went. And when she went, she actually found a fresh rose growing there and brought it back to Rita. And to St. Rita, this was a sign that her husband and her sons were in heaven with her. And then this next window actually goes in reverse but to another significant moment in her life, the moment where she received partial stigmata. So Good Friday one year, as she was meditating on this image of Christ, she wanted to just comfort Christ in his suffering as much as possible. And she just kept asking Jesus, like, how can I comfort you? How can I comfort you? And then she felt a pain on her forehead. She had a single wound on her forehead in correlation to the crown of thorns that Christ had. And so even though this wound was painful, and there are some legends that say it didn't really smell the best, so people didn't really want to be around her, she endured that suffering out of love for Christ, and she was very pleased that her prayers were answered in that way. This is the image that St. Rita would have grown up seeing a lot of. It's an image called the Resurgent Christ, or Jesus of Holy Saturday. You see here the tomb, and he's rising out of the tomb, but he's not yet out. It's not yet Easter Sunday. But you see his wrappings from being buried are off, and his eyes are opening, so he's waking up. So this would have been a devotional image of St. Rita's, held very dear to her, because while it depicts Christ's suffering, as you can see on the wounds, and the crown of thorns, it also depicts the upcoming salvation that would happen just the day after. So this was actually the image that she was meditating on when she received the stigmata. If you turn and look directly behind you, you see a statue of St. Rita constantly meditating on this image. And here's a case to kind of depict a couple points about St. Rita. So this is an authentic habit that she would have worn in her life. She didn't actually wear this while she was alive, but her body is incorrupt in Cascia. And so her incorrupt body actually has worn this habit, wore it for a few years, and then it was donated to the National Shrine here in Philadelphia. And so you can see the gold detail and the little shoes, but St. Rita was not the tallest. She was in between 4 and 5. I find that very inspirational, that such a small woman could do so much. She negotiated a peace agreement that ended a generations-long vendetta. She entered the convent, she was a wife, she was a mother, so she did so many things in such a small size, but with a big heart.
Small size, big heart.
The mural is actually done by a local artist, Anthony Visco. He lives a couple blocks away, and he not only painted this mural, but he also did all of the statues in the lower shrine. But St. Rita's there in the middle, and she's handing out symbols of peace, so a dove, an olive branch, and she's handing them to people in exchange for their weapons. So at the bottom of the mural, you see this big pit with all these weapons thrown in, and the more you take in the mural, the more you see that people are giving her their weapons. There's even a man on one side of the mural, he's breaking his sword in half, a conquistador. And so St. Rita's encountering all these people and exchanging war for peace and fighting for harmony. And something else to notice about the people in the mural is that they're from all different time periods in all different locations around the world. So this symbolizes that peace can always be done. There can always be a work done for peace, no matter what time period or location that you're living in. And so you see some figures such as World War II soldiers, World War I sailor, from all different eras of history coming to St. Rita. We also see some local celebrities. So here is St. Catherine Drexel with some students of hers, and then St. John Newman right there. Yeah, and then here we see her patron saints, so St. Augustine on the left, St. John the Baptist in the center, St. Nicholas of Tolentine on the right. And they're all actually descending from Rocca Perenna, so where she's from. Her legacy that she left is moving them to be more peaceful people. So a lot of times as we teach people about this mural, we invite them to think, okay, maybe you don't have a javelin or a medieval instrument of torture, but what act to disrupt peace is in our own lives. So a lot of times it's social media or just the words that we say, and we invite people to just reflect and think, what is disrupting peace in my life right now, and how can I ask St. Rita to help me restore that peace? You know, she's also the patroness of the impossible. And it's like, even in situations where someone thinks like, oh, but this is impossible. It's impossible that this person will change their mind, or they'll think of something different. She was very persistent. She was persistent in her call to be a sister. She was persistent in showing virtue in her life and constantly speaking to people about her faith. And she accomplished what seemed impossible. Through faith and persistence in prayer, St. Rita shows us that anything is possible. So she kind of shares the peacemaker and the impossible, and they go hand in hand, but you know, a lot of people have devotions to both of her titles. We do have a saint's grotto that's full of like hundreds of relics, but just as I'm doing the loop around the lower shrine, I like to point out there's St. Augustine with the relics of his mother, St. Monica, and his own relics. So here's the statue of St. Nicholas of Tolentine, and actually he was, like I mentioned, he was canonized during St. Rita's lifetime. So there's a legend with that where she had already received the stigmata at this point, and it was very painful, and it was, according to legend, very smelly. Again, I wasn't there, I wouldn't know, but she wanted to go to his canonization ceremony, and the other sister said, we can't really bring you with an open wound, like it's just, people are they're gonna get a little freaked out, or like it'll smell really bad, so unfortunately you can't come. So she prayed and prayed and prayed, God, please heal this wound just so I can go to his canonization. So actually the wound was healed, she was able to go, and as soon as she got back, the wound came back, and she was like, okay, that's what I prayed for. So she was able to go for him to be canonized. Rita's incorrupt body is in Cascia, but they actually gave this relic to the shrine. You can see an engraving on the golden case to St. Rita's shrine, Phila, here in Philadelphia. And there's also a pillow here. That's where her hands would have rested on, her incorrupt hands. So this is just a place a lot of visitors come and they fill out intentions, put it in a basket, and they kneel in prayer. All of the saint statues are kneeling to symbolize the movement towards the Eucharist. When one is confronted with the Eucharist, they are compelled to bow, to kneel out of, you know, just admiration of it. In addition, it's each of her patron saints that are kneeling around Rita. So just as they were praying for her while she was alive, they continue to pray now with her in heaven and pray for everybody who comes to visit. Oh yeah, and she's holding a thorn to be similar to her wound, which would have been the wound from a single thorn in the crown of thorns. And then the last thing in the lower shrine is the Saint's Grotto. So this grotto is full of relics, and I believe they all belonged to one Augustinian friar when he passed. This was all his collection. It was given to the shrine. So all the relics are organized by month. So a lot of student groups or people who come here, they like to look at their birth month to see what relics are out. In addition, there's 12 different statues of saints in this grotto, so people are able to come and bring their intentions to these saints in addition to St. Rita. So it's a place where people of all different spiritualities, different devotions can come together in prayer.
Thank you so much for watching. We were able to sit down with the shrine and talk to them on the Everyday Saint podcast all about St. Rita's life, really learning from her as the patroness of impossible cases, the patroness of peacemakers, but also someone who practiced such extreme patience when it came to God's plan for her life. And there's so much that we can learn, and that you don't need to be healed in order to be holy, and St. Rita exemplifies that. So to continue learning about the St. Rita shrine, you can check out the Everyday Saint podcast and listen in on this conversation that we're able to have with the St. Rita shrine. You can also learn more at the website located in the link below. Thank you so much. God bless you.